is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Tuesday in October with a special episode. A week ahead of the trade deadline, the Ravens make a splash, trading for Carolina Panthers wide receiver Diontae Johnson. We're going to break down the move from every angle, what they gave up, if it was good compensation, how Diontae Johnson fits into this offense, which is one of the best in the NFL. All that and much, much more. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Jonas, let's dive right into this. Ravens trading for veteran wide receiver Diontae Johnson. It was a move that we were not fully expecting a week ahead of the trade deadline. They give up a 5th-round pick and get back Diontae Johnson and a 6th-round pick, so really just a late day 3 pick swap. And they could also get a compensation pick back around the 5th round if he leaves in free agency. So you're looking at all the moves made around the NFL, wide receivers on the move. We saw Devontae Adams traded. We've seen DeAnthony Hopkins traded. We've seen, or DeAndre Hopkins, I should say, traded. We've seen everybody go for a bigger price than this. This seems like pretty good compensation for a guy who was a Pro Bowler a few seasons ago.
Yeah, I think you brought up the point that I was going to, Paul, which is that if this is a hit for the Ravens and he has like a 600, 700-yard season total, then he's probably going to fetch a decent penny on the open market when he hits it, because assuming that the Ravens do not bring him back. And because of all the other moves that the Ravens have to make in-house after the season, in next offseason, I imagine they won't be too busy on the free agent market. So assuming that he goes for, anywhere from like $5 to $15 million a year annual value, that'll probably do pretty well in the compensatory pick formula. And I don't think the Ravens will be spending a lot of outside money to cancel that out. So it is kind of reminiscent of what the Ravens did in 2020 when they traded for Yannick Ngakoue. That was also, like, I think they gave up a 5th or a 4th rounder to get him from, I believe it was Minnesota. But baked into that calculus was, all right, if this guy really does a good job for us, then he'll, go for over $10 million a year on the open market, and we might get some of that draft capital back in terms of a compensatory pick. Obviously, it would have to be 2 years from now, because it's not like there is that lag time with the compensatory pick formula. But the Ravens also have a projected compensatory 5th-round pick coming for the Jadeveon Clowney loss from this past offseason. So this is just how the Ravens do business. And I think this is the right kind of move that you want to make to give this offense a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more functionality. Obviously, it is not exactly what Ravens fans have been clamoring for after the stink fest of the defense put up on Sunday. But I think we could probably table that discussion for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, and the cap hit appears to not be terrible either. He's in the 2nd year of a $36 million deal that he signed a couple off seasons ago. But Spotrac right now has him on the books for a $16.3 million cap hit, which is high, but it's not absurd. And you assume that that's prorated over the course of the final remaining regular season games?
Yeah, and I think it's been reported that the Panthers are going to pay down the majority of that, which works perfectly with the Ravens because they do not have much cap space to spend. So the Panthers are doing a lot of the Ravens' busy work, or a lot of the Ravens' dirty work on this in terms of getting this deal done.
Yeah, and it was clear that after his last game with the Panthers that Diontae Johnson was not exactly thrilled with this situation. And why would he be? Because he goes from literally the worst offense in the NFL to the best or the second best, depending on what metric you look at. And he is entering a much more crowded wide receiver room with already established number 1s and number 2s in Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. But he's also going from perhaps the worst quarterback situation in the NFL to literally the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson. So I think he'd rather be a number 4 option on the best offense in the NFL than the number 1 option with Bryce Young as your quarterback.
Yeah, I think, looking at some of the tweets out of Carolina from the reporters who cover the team, you get the sense that Diontae was rattling some cages to, bust out of there. And because he is a pending free agent, it does make sense. I mean, with all due respect to Andy Dalton, I would much rather show my stuff with a established top 10 quarterback, top 15 quarterback on a potential playoff team. And Lamar Jackson and Baltimore is obviously that. So I guess you do wonder, you do worry a little bit about the potential diva factor. I know that was something that was whispered about in, kind of unconfirmed, unverified tones when he was in Pittsburgh for a little while there. Obviously, that was another kind of crowded receiver room, and there was not exactly a ceremonious exit for him when he was traded this past offseason. But if winning is the best deodorant, if it's going to make everything easy to accept, then this is the kind of move that you have to make. I mean, every single receiver who has been bandied about at this trade deadline, you could say is looking for that next bag, is looking for that chance to get on a winning team, get with a much better quarterback, and why not take a chance on a guy who will probably like Lamar, because everyone likes Lamar, and will probably get the chance to have a lot of really great looks in this offense, because how many times we've talked about just how few tight window throws Lamar is even attempting this season. So many of these guys are wide ass open, and it just so happens that Diontae Johnson, like Rashad Bateman, like Zay Flowers, like Mark Andrews, is really, really good at getting separation.
And Diontae had already put up 357 yards with 3 touchdowns in 7 games with Andy Dalton / Bryce Young at quarterback. So with a terrible situation and from all accounts, a bad offensive structure as well. They didn't really have any other options. They didn't have a whole lot of great stuff going in the passing game or the running game. So he was still putting up okay stats in 7 games with the Panthers. And he's still on the right side of 30s, 28 years old. It feels like he's been in the league for a long time because we've seen him play in Pittsburgh for so long, where he spent 5 seasons, earned a Pro Bowl nod in 2021 when he topped 1,000 yards for the only time. He was a 2019 third-round pick. He's 5'10", 183, so he's not a huge guy. He's not exactly a prototypical X receiver. And he joined the Panthers back in March when he was traded by the Steelers with a 7th-round pick for a 6th-round pick. So a similar day 3 pick swap is how the Panthers got him. And Jonas, I think the fact that he was able to put up any stats in the absolutely terrible offense, from quarterback to skill positions to play calling, I think speaks to the fact that he still can play and he still is a productive wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that is most tantalizing and probably most scary for opposing defenses right now is you're talking about a trio or a foursome of really, really productive receivers right now. Just looking on True Media right now, since week 3, which is a useful cutoff point because that was the start of the Ravens' 5-game winning streak, which of course ended Sunday, but it was also the brief end of the Bryce Young era. Week 3 was the first start that Andy Dalton got. So yards per route run, we talked about, it's a pretty good metric in terms of just measuring how good you do with the opportunities that you get. And you have Zay Flowers, number 14 among receivers with 15 yards in that span. You've got Rashad Bateman, also averaging over 2 yards per route run. You've got Mark Andrews averaging 1.92, which is really good for a tight end. And then Diontae Johnson, 2.04. So 3 of the top 34 receivers by yards per route run are now in Baltimore. If you want to expand that to Mark Andrews, you've got 4 of the top 41. I don't think there are a lot of other teams in the NFL with that kind of firepower, especially considering you look around the league, and obviously Kansas City is dealing with their personnel losses. The Texans just lost Stephon Diggs, and obviously won't have Nico Collins for a little while he recovers from his own injury. So this is, if it wasn't already clear, I think this is easily the most talented group of skill position players that Lamar Jackson has ever had, and that's not even accounting for the possibility that Keaton Mitchell will look as good as he did last year when he comes back in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that the Ravens, since signing Lamar Jackson to that extension, are investing more and more in the firepower around Lamar Jackson, and it's showing in the results. I mean, they get Todd Monken in here a year ago, and he has been scheming up better plays, has really taken the training wheels off of Lamar Jackson as a passer and allowed him to make all kinds of new decisions at the line of scrimmage, and that has emboldened him as a passer. And we've seen that work out for an MVP season and maybe another this year. And they're adding to the talent around him. I mean, they're clearly investing top picks, not just in the offensive line, but they're investing top picks at wide receiver, at free agent contracts, at running back. They are doing more to support Lamar Jackson than they did in his first however many years in the NFL, first 3-4 years in the NFL. But when you add a player like this to a already talented group of wide receivers, I mean, Zay Flowers is 12th in the NFL in receiving yards. Rashad Bateman is 20th. Both those guys have taken a step forward this season. You do ask the question of if this is too many mouths to feed right now, because Mark Andrews has come on the last couple of weeks. He's looking more and more like his old self. Isaiah Likely obviously flashed a lot in the second half last season and has flashed at times this season, shown improvement as a blocker. Then you've got running backs who can catch passes too. I mean, Derrick Henry can catch a few passes, but you're going to get Keaton Mitchell back at some point soon. Justice Hill has been very good in the passing game and has been a good pass blocker as well. Heck, Charlie Kohler has been a solid pass catcher so far this season. So you do wonder a little bit, is this too many mouths to feed in the passing game?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of like wide receiver threes who would be wide receiver twos elsewhere. You've got running back threes who would be running back twos elsewhere. And you've got tight end twos, tight end threes who would be 1 and 2 elsewhere. If you consider that Isaiah Likely has flashed above average starting tight end potential when he's got the opportunity, when Mark Andrews has been out, and obviously Charlie Kohler, I think, has shown himself to be a really useful tight end. So as I said a couple minutes ago, winning is the best deodorant. If these guys roll up another 5-game winning streak, I don't think you'll see or hear too much chirping about, why aren't you getting me the ball? Why isn't this happening? Why aren't I more featured? I think this team takes its lead from Lamar, and he's shown that he's willing to kind of subjugate some of his, ideal passing numbers to the pursuit of a Super Bowl championship. And you would think that because of just how many tough postseasons the Ravens have had, during the professional lifespan of these guys, that they would be willing to do the same and not look out for number one. I mean, Zay is obviously under contract for a few more years. Mark Andrews is under contract for a few more years. Isaiah Likely, I mean, pretty much the only guy with a relatively uncertain future is Diontae Johnson. And I think he's probably coming to Baltimore with the understanding that, it's probably unlikely that he's going to get re-signed. So why not just do everything he can to ball out here and try to get that next paycheck? But it's going to be interesting just to see how this changes what the Ravens can do offensively and what the Ravens do offensively, just because obviously they've been a heavy personnel team, and I don't think this means that they are automatically going to revert to what they did last year, when it was a lot of 11 personnel looks with Bateman, Flowers, OBJ on the field at the same time. But I do think that it gives them more flexibility to be a more amorphous kind of offense, just, rolling with the punches as they see fit. I think also this is perhaps a preemptive strike if they were to meet the Chiefs again, because I think Kansas City has shown itself to be a team that is very, very good with that base defense, that base personnel on defense. They are comfortable rolling 3 linebackers out there, 4 defensive backs out there, and saying, we don't think that you can knock us off the ball. We don't think that you can separate. But with their injuries in the secondary and the Ravens maybe getting a little bit more comfortable in 11 personnel, then perhaps this is the kind of move that you need to make that gives you the upper hand that you need if indeed that rematch against the Chiefs materializes in the playoffs.
And I kind of like thinking ahead like that, because last year the offense looked pretty much perfect. They looked pretty much impervious to any kind of defense throughout the regular season. And it wasn't until the playoffs that they hit that speed bump. So maybe Eric DeCosta looking ahead and saying, the offense has been great. The passing game has been phenomenal so far this season. Bateman, Flowers, Mark Andrews, they all look great right now. But let's look ahead. It might not be all sunshine and roses once we face a tough defense like the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. So let's have more options for when we eventually have to face a team like the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game or in the divisional round. The question is also, though, who he takes snaps away from, Diontae Johnson, because you mentioned them trying to change their personnel, maybe keeping Isaiah Likely off the field for more snaps and allowing him to play. If you look at taking snaps away from wide receivers, I mean, Nelson Aguilar has been the wide receiver 3 this year like he was last year, and he's actually playing slightly fewer snaps this year than he did last year, 48% compared to 52%, but he has been less productive. He's catching 50% of his passes, of his targets. That's down from 78%, so he's still producing a lot, but he's doing it on more targets so far this season. We saw him drop a pass in Sunday's game. We saw Rashad Bateman have a couple big drops. I don't think that this team is necessarily reacting to Sunday's game and saying that the wide receivers weren't good enough for that one game, so we need to add to this wide receiver core. I think they're just saying, let's get as much firepower as we need. And God forbid one of these guys goes down. I mean, God forbid you lose Rashad Bateman or Zay Flowers in the second half of the season and you don't have somebody to replace him. You don't want to be all of a sudden asking Tylan Wallace to play 25, 30% of the snaps. You'd rather keep him at 14% or where he's at right now, or even less than that, especially after John Harbaugh kind of called him out for a special teams mishap on Sunday.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Nelly because he is also another pending free agent who, on paper, it would be pretty adversely affected by this. Most of his snaps, it seems like, he has become probably the most trusted blocking wide receiver. He is the guy who is usually out there hitting those crack blocks to spring the, 20, 40, 60-yard Derrick Henry runs that we've seen so many times. So he has obviously accepted the kind of grinder role in this offense. And I think there will probably be snaps for him doing that, but maybe he becomes a little bit more easy to telegraph what exactly he's on the field for if, Diontae Johnson is going to be your more dedicated receiver, and Nelson and Tylan Wallace become more of your, prototypical blockers. So I guess you do worry a little bit about that, but it's going to be interesting to see. I think probably the Ravens will still be a smash mouth kind of team because that's what favors Derrick Henry. But, you think about what made Keaton Mitchell so effective last year. It was, like we talked about last week, spread them out, get those 6-man looks in the box and just run all over them because they are not quick enough to get to those gaps, or they are so worried about Lamar on those, option keepers that Keaton Mitchell just has these running lanes to run wild. And it was interesting just to look before we hopped on this podcast and see whether Derrick Henry has had the same kind of look with those, 11 personnel, spread looks, light boxes. It hasn't really been as effective as a lot of other backs around the league. Maybe just a change in scenery, going to an offense with Lamar Jackson at quarterback instead of a Ryan Tannehill gives him the boost where he is also just as unstoppable running into light boxes as Keaton Mitchell was last year. Still kind of a TBD because they are very different runners in terms of how they, get up to that optimal acceleration. But I guess the big question that this deal kind of leaves me with is just like, is there a next move to be made? Because when you see the slop fest that we did on Sunday and you make a move and the first move that you make is for a wide receiver for the NFL's best passing offense, at least by efficiency, it does kind of remind me of like the boyfriend who crashes the girlfriend's car, and instead of actually getting the car fixed, it's like goes out and buys her a box of chocolates. Like it's not actually fixing anything for the most important part of what this team, of what this team's vision is for the long-term future.
Are you speaking from experience there, Jonas?
I've not crashed my girlfriend's car. That would be wildly unchivalrous.
Yeah, and if you did, then you would try to get fixes instead of buying chocolates. I mean, it was sort of a train wreck or a car wreck in the secondary against the Cleveland Browns, and for their issues that they had at wide receiver and dropping passes, that compared not at all to the issues that they had in the secondary, dropping interceptions, but also just not playing well. This is a move that I think Eric DeCosta saw an opportunity to make, and he made it. I don't think this necessarily bars them from making another move in the next 6 or 7 days, because they still have a week before the trade deadline. That trade deadline's not until next Tuesday, November 5th at 4:00. And they still kept the powder dry. I mean, trading a 5th round pick and getting back a 6th round pick does not at all take away your ammo for another big move. And I think that they should still make another big move. I don't know if that's going to be in the secondary. Maybe now that Marcus Williams has been benched, they say, yeah, Eddie Jackson's probably not going to get the job done for us. Maybe let's get another safety. Or they focus on the pass rush. That I still think is probably where they should dedicate their resources, because it's going to cost a lot, but that guy can wreck a game. I don't know exactly who. Maybe they call the Carolina Panthers back up and say, I know we just made a move, but let's make another and let's go get Jadeveon Clowney back. But I think that they should surrender a greater asset in order to get a pass rusher, somebody who is more of a game changer, because Diontae Johnson doesn't materially change your passing attack, over the course of the rest of the regular season. He is a nice piece to add, but you are going to get what you paid for. He's not going to have a crazy, ridiculous 1,000-yard season with the Ravens. They need to get somebody who has 10-plus sack potential, I think, at the trade deadline. So to me, I think that this doesn't really address their biggest need. I think this is just Eric DeCosta saying, we can get this guy pretty cheap, and we think he's going to be better here than he has been in Carolina.
And not saying that it's not possible, but it does seem a little bit unlikely that the Ravens would be 2-time trade partners with the Panthers in the span of about a week.
It would be the Orioles.
It seems unlikely that they would double dip.
You never know. Just, you already have that relationship, call them right back up.
Yeah. It's just to me, I can scarcely recall like double dip trades with the same team for a contender, but maybe it'll happen. And it's not like Jadeveon Clowney is the only guy who would lift the floor of this pass rush significantly.
Yeah.
Darius Smith,
Max Crosby,
the Browns.
Yeah.
I don't think Crosby's going to happen, but a lot of guys around the league who I think can be had, especially if Sunday just continues to, if it signals to certain teams after a loss that they are no longer in the market of being buyers, and they are told by ownership that we want to we should part with this player so we could recoup some nice draft capital, then I think we'll probably have a better sense for just who could be had after this Sunday, because they dropped to 3-5 or 2-6, and they are told by ownership that they're no longer in the running to do something significant this year. So it's time to tear everything down and call around and see what can be had for pass rusher X or pass rusher Y.
And on the other side, this current Ravens team is worth the investment. It's worth investing a future asset in, because they clearly, despite their struggles on Sunday, they have what it takes. They have the players, the talent, the coaching to get this group over the top, to get back to the AFC Championship game and maybe the Super Bowl. They still have number 1, number 2 offense in the NFL. If you can get that unit to be the best in the NFL, you take that chance, because if you literally have the best unit, offense or defense, in the NFL, that is such an advantage that you roll into the playoffs with. And I think that's what Eric DeCosta is saying, is this group is already so good. Let's add strength to strength, and let's add Diontae Johnson to this offense and see if we can get them over the top. I don't think it means that they're not going to address defense. I just think that they think that they can literally have a back-to-back MVP at quarterback. They can have the NFL's leading rusher at running back, and they can have one of the strongest wide receiver rooms in the NFL.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee. We've already seen Zay Flowers take a little bit of an injury risk with the ankle. Obviously, it wasn't so adversely affected as to not be capable of a 100-yard game in the game right after he took that knock. But we've seen Rashad Bateman miss some time for various injuries. Both those guys are on the leaner side of things, so you worry about them being able to hold up over the course of a 17-game season. both really diligent with their offseason workouts. So I think that if any two guys in the NFL were to be capable of, making it through that 17-game marathon, I think both those guys would be right at the top. But freak injuries happen all the time. You look at, Jaden Daniels and what led to that rib injury. It was just such a freak occurrence that almost knocked him out of that game against the Bears. So you can never be too sure. I would much rather have Diontae Johnson be the wide receiver 3 ready to step up into wide receiver 2 role than Nelson Aguilar, but with all due respect to Nelly. So you can never be too careful. I think we've probably seen an acceleration of the Ravens timetable, Paul. We talked about at the start of the season that the writing on the wall from what Eric DeCosta was saying about how they were kind of willing to endure some bumps in the road for this offensive line, that it seemed like maybe 2025 was going to be the year where they were really counting on everything coming together, because of how many players they would have coming back on offense, how many players they would be coming back on defense. Obviously, we didn't expect the complete clown show on defense, but that there's still hope for a turnaround. Maybe if not, right away, then perhaps by the end of the season. And listen, if you have a top 3 offense, then as long as you have a mediocre defense, I think anything is possible in the playoffs. And I think right now the goal is just to win the division, get yourself a home game, and just see just how everything kind of shakes out from there.
Yeah, and if you'd asked me 9 weeks ago, and we did ask each other this question on the Banner Ravens podcast, what the biggest need would be at the trade deadline, I would have said wide receiver first or second. That's why before the season, I predicted that they would trade for Davante Adams, because to me, that was a massive need. And the reemergence of Rashad Bateman has certainly helped that need. Zay Flowers taking a step up in his second season has certainly helped that need. But you need as much firepower as you can possibly get on offense. Kansas City's one team. The Steelers are going to be their team that loves that one single high safety. It's a team that you could take advantage of, but a team that is one of the best in the NFL on that side of the ball that you're going to have to face twice this season and maybe again in the playoffs. So you need as much firepower as you can get there. And I still think that they have some powder if they need to go out and make another move at some point. So exciting times for the Ravens to go out and get Diontae Johnson week before the deadline.
Yeah, and I forget if I've mentioned this on the podcast, so forgive me for if I'm repeating myself. But even though this has obviously been a offense that has done incredible work in 12 personnel, 21 personnel, 22 personnel, I keep coming back to Greg Cosell of NFL Films, who does a lot of film study. Talking, I think, after the Ravens-Bills game, or maybe before the Ravens-Bills game, that his understanding was that Todd Monken would be more comfortable working with those 3 receiver looks, operating in that 11 personnel world. Obviously, he's proven himself with his work this year, with his work at Georgia, with Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, that he's very comfortable operating in that kind of 2 tight end, 2-back world, that he can be flexible. He can work on his feet. He can kind of go wherever he needs to just have a very, very efficient offense. But maybe this is, kind of him whispering to John Harbaugh, who then whispers to Eric DeCosta, who then, asks Steve Bisciotti for permission. Like, hey, it sure would be nice to have another wide receiver, because I think that as good as this offense is right now, and it is, at least it was until Sunday, on a historic pace, I think it could be even better with 3 wide receiver looks being our default look as opposed to 2 wide receivers. So whether that bears out any fruit, I guess we'll see. But Diontae Johnson, I think, is the kind of guy with the flexibility of Bateman, the flexibility of Zay Flowers, and just the other pieces in this offense who can line up in a whole lot of different places. I think all the pieces will kind of fit together, assuming that there is no, kind of diva concerns there.
And this is also an acknowledgement that the Devontae Walker selection in the 4th round has not worked out so far. It's still very early in his career. However, he has been active for just 2 games and has only played on special teams. So that was an exciting pick when the Ravens made it. And you thought, okay, maybe there's some more juice to squeeze from this guy at UNC who's got ideal height, weight, speed, but it just hasn't worked out so far. He was, barely played in the preseason, and then so far this season has barely been active. So the Ravens don't expect much from him, but they said, we're not going to wait for this guy to develop. We're not going to waste any time here. We're going to go out and just bolster that room right now. Jonas, we have 2 more days before we have another podcast, so we shouldn't waste any time here because we're going to be back to preview the Ravens game against the Denver Broncos on the Banner Ravens podcast. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. $1 for 6 months, where Jonas Shaffer and Gianna Hahn and Kyle Goon are breaking down this trade and getting you ready for the Ravens Week 9 matchup. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul